Hello everybody, welcome to GYEEE Talks, where we get you interesting stories from yogis and yoga teachers and Ayurveda experts from around the world. This time around, we have Nadya with us. Nadya is a sales and management professional turned entrepreneur and yoga teacher who has dedicated her life towards teaching yoga in South Africa. In 2011, Nadya found her passion for yoga after really finding it helpful in her own journey. She started teaching yoga. In 2013, she quit her corporate job and opened her first home-based yoga studio, expanding then into a separate office building. Along with teaching people yoga, she also specializes in trauma rehabilitation through yoga. Her teacher training programs are based on assisting yoga teachers for creating and holding space for people dealing with trauma, PTSD, CPTSD, as well as anxiety and depressive mental states. She also integrates genetics, epigenetics, the nervous system theory, and anatomy in her yogic practice. Nadya joins us today from South Africa. Welcome, Nadya. How are you?
Well, thanks, and you?
I'm good, Nadya. Thanks a lot for joining us today. Nadya, before we start the conversation, Nadya, how about you give us a background about, what's up with you, what's your background, how did your journeys with yoga start, and what are you up to these days?
In many ways, I used to talk about yoga and meditation and awareness and energy and all sorts of things like that long before I actually went to a class. So I was always a little bit on sort of the outer edges in our community because these things weren't talked about like in the 90s when I was still a teenager. And it made me a little bit odd. It made me struggle to find a place where I belong. And this was on top of coming from a household that was abusive, where I was already not accepted for who I was. So that journey, looking for a space where I could be accepted, where I wasn't judged or anything. And also because I came from this abusive household, looking for a better way to exist and to be and to put myself out into the world. My particular PTSD and anxiety showed up as extreme, violent anger. And so a lot of people tell me today that they cannot even envision this, but yes, this is, and it still shows up sometimes when I'm very tired or when I'm in a rough space. This is like my fallback reaction, just because it's the way that I grew up. But eventually, when my first child was born, I found an actual yoga teacher and I started doing the classes, and it was about 4 months later when I woke up one morning after having this dream and I told my husband, I am going to be a yoga teacher. And he was, like guys are, like, what does this mean financially for us? And how are you going to do it? And can you really quit your job? And I told him, listen, I'm just going to take one step at a time. I'm going to look for a course and I'm going to do it. And it was so serendipitous that I found a space that provided a teacher training that was flexible enough that I could incorporate it into my life, because I had an 8 to 5 at that point, and I had a little girl, and I had a husband, and and that was just it. Started from there. Originally, and I think this is true for all yoga teachers, I was an extreme fundamentalist. And I believed that the way that I was taught was the only way, and that this could be applied to everything. But as I grew in my yoga teacher journey, I came to understand that, everybody's in their own space, in different cultures and different societies and genders even, ask us to adapt the practice that we absolutely love in order to help different people at different times. So I became more flexible even in my yoga practice and in my yoga mind than I originally had been.
I think this is like, this is how it starts. First you don't know, then and I think it's the same for everybody. First you don't know, then you know something and you think that, okay, this is the truth, this is what I know. And then when you keep on learning, then I don't even know like 1% of this. There's so much to know now.
I know. And I think this is the truth for everything is, I mean, even the human race, even society, even the world, even, you know, the actual physical world out there, everything is consistently evolving. For anybody to come and say that this is the way that it is and this is the way that it's going to be forever, it's ridiculous. People change, the world changes, what we know, our technology changes, everything changes. And yoga isn't different from that, and your yoga mind isn't different from that.
Yes, absolutely. And thanks a lot for bringing that up. I think for a lot of us, for a lot of people, and this is like human nature. You know, when we know something, as we say, you know, sometimes ego and ahankar comes with it, and then when you keep on learning, and then you know that there's so much more to learn. So Nadya, you know what? I know we've been talking a lot, and you know I know, but you know, for people who are listening to you for the first time, what does yoga mean to you personally? I know that you know you shared with me your past trauma and everything, but you know, what if you had to put it like in a short 1 or 2 lines, what would you say yoga means to you?
Well, for me, yoga is any practice. So yoga means union, and I think most people who practice yoga at some point come across this definition. But for me, yoga is the practices that we do in order to bring us home to ourselves. So when you go out into the world, you are spending little bits of your time, little bits of your energy, all over. You are playing roles. You are absorbing energies from different people and spaces and whatever the case might be. And yoga is the balance to that. I mean, we cannot be alive without this. We need to go out into the world. We need to experience things. We need to have emotions. But then yoga is the practices that allows us to take these pieces, the ways in which we've unraveled into the world, and reweave them into ourselves and into our understanding of ourselves, so that when we go out into the world again, we can purposefully decide who and how we want to be, who and how we want to show up as, and that we can do that with more presence and awareness. So I think yoga is just, it's that balance, you know. It's the practices that allow you to have the balance, that allow you to feel your emotions, but decide how you want to react to them.
Yes.
And that allows you to love, but also have boundaries, and allows you to be compassionate and kind, but also know when you need to take care of yourself, and allows you to work and have your jobs, but not burn out. And any practice at the end of the day. So yoga, a lot of us think today is the asanas, but for me, it is any practice that allows you the quiet and the stillness that you need to reweave who you are and to understand yourself better.
And you know, it is, you put it so beautifully and very simplistically, you know, and we were discussing one of the major issues that has happened with yoga is it has become so top down, so preachy, and you know, most of the time when somebody goes into and starts to learn about and read about yoga, one of the things that people realize is I'm a common person. How do I relate to this? And you know, this is like you put it so beautifully. And when we are, you know, generally when we are working with people, so we work with a lot of people with lifestyle issues. We talked about this earlier, with blood pressure, diabetes, cholesterol, and you know, as you said, what we consume is not only food but also the inputs, also the people's emotions, the energies that you're consuming, and everything manifests some way. And a lot of lifestyle issues, when we start with people, working with people, we realize that the major issue is within. It is not the BP that has gone high, it's not the cholesterol that has gone high, it's not the weight, it's not the sugar, but it is you know, you're not managing yourself properly. And I think beautifully said, Nadya, you know, yoga helps you manage consciously yourself, more consciously.
Exactly. It is the way ultimately that you learn how to navigate life. You can't bypass life. You can't say, oh, I don't want these experiences. Sometimes we have a little bit of control over our lives, but more often than not, we don't.
Yes.
And sometimes there are just things that we have to do.
Yes.
You know, and I have this discussion with my kids often, is like, you don't, if you want to be alive in this world, if you want to have a household one day, you have to make your bed, you have to wash the dishes, you have to buy your food and have a means to buy the food, you know. So there's only so much that you can do. There's things that you love to do, there's things that you have to do, there's people that you love to meet, there's people that you have to meet, and this is the practices that you do in order to help you manage and navigate all of that and still remember who you are, so that you don't build too many walls and you don't have too many coping mechanisms.
Yes, and you know, somebody, I don't remember who said it, but I was talking to somebody and they gave me a beautiful quote. It was like, life will happen around you, but it is your choice of how you want to react to it. And I think, you know, and what do you want to react to and what you don't want to react to. And I think yoga really helps you connect with that. It's you rightly said, it's not just the asana, it's the practice. It's the dincharya, it's how you conduct yourself, right? And so Nadya, you know, moving on, so I talk to a lot of people who are in India, who are, you know, in the West, where yoga is like so huge. But how was it growing up in South Africa, where, you know, where yoga is not like so part of the culture there? It's like, you know, still something which people are still adapting to. How was it growing up there? And, you know, do you see any changes now in South Africa when, you know, when you're working with so many people there, when towards people's perception of yoga and how people are, you know, taking up yoga there?
So in the 90s, when I grew up, there was, I cannot even tell you how I knew about yoga or meditation. And like I said, I was a little bit of an odd duck. So people just thought that when I talked about yoga and meditation, it was just part of all the weirdness that I was.
Yes.
But it took a really long time for yoga to become mainstream. And originally, mainly only Iyengar teachers were in South Africa. Even when I started in 2010, 2011 with my classes were few. They weren't mainstream at all. So in about 10, 12 years, yoga has completely exploded in South Africa. And I think it has a lot to do with a lot of young people starting out on that journey and looking for better ways to be. In all honesty, because I always had to forge my own way, I didn't always realize how much people were judged for doing yoga. But when I opened my own yoga studio, it was surprising to me how many people came to me and told me that their family had like an intervention because they were doing this yoga thing, which according to the church was from the devil, and this person had changed. And that was the biggest problem. This person had changed, which means that yoga had an influence, which means that yoga was no longer just a neutral thing that they were practicing. So I do believe that by and large, a lot of people are still kind of, you do your thing and I do my thing and that's going to be okay. And it's only in familial situations, family and friends, that people will find that people will be extremely judgmental of what they're doing. But a lot of studios have closed down during COVID, obviously. For the larger part of things, people seem to be accepting of it. The sad thing, I mean, there's always pros and cons. The sad thing about this explosion of yoga is that sometimes it's a little bit watered down. And also it seems to reach a very specific class. So it seems to be reaching mostly white, suburban, middle-class women. And I mean, I'm not going to, everybody needs yoga as far as I'm concerned. There are people in the rural townships and on the poverty line that could really, really benefit from this. And even in schools, kids have so much pressure. So these kids and schools could really benefit from it. But especially in schools, there's still a lot of judgment because a lot of our schools are Christian-based. So they won't allow yoga in there. And then obviously it's not reaching the people in the lower classes, lower price tags, I should say, not
economic status, the lower economic segments.
Yeah, so yoga is not really reaching the people in the lower economic status, and this is problematic, I think. It should be, but there are yoga teachers in South Africa who are doing fabulous things for what do we call it, the NPOs, and going out into the rural townships and using yoga in order to raise funds for people affected by COVID, for example, or even before that, people who needed money raised for schools and things like that. So there are teachers who are doing fabulous things in that regard.
Yes, and thank you. Thanks a lot for sharing that, Nadya. And I think one of the good things about pop culture has been that the recent culture, with so many people adopting it, it has become like more like a part of people's lifestyles now than I mean, in India we've been doing it for like time immemorial. I don't even remember, but I think still some very small parts of people do have this whole thing wherein sometimes people take it as a part of religion, but as you rightly said, it's not everybody needs yoga. It's a way to manage yourself.
Yes.
Okay, so let's talk a little about the trauma rehabilitation part of yoga, and I know you are working a lot on that. How important do you think yoga can play a role in trauma recovery? And are there like specific trauma cases wherein you've seen a bigger role being played, or do you see like an equal split? How do you look at yoga's part in the trauma rehabilitation?
Much of my understanding or my yoga for trauma practice comes from resolving my own things, and it needs to be said that like 20 years ago, a lot of these things didn't have acceptable labels. If you had anxiety disorder, you were just told to get over it. If you had depression, you were told to just think happy thoughts or whatever. And we're only now coming to understand that these things are really debilitating disorders, whatever you want to call them, and that they need to be handled with a lot of sensitivity, and well, they need to actually just in the end be acknowledged and validated. And yoga has a role to play, and I think it's important to understand that the important aspect of this is a role. Because a lot of times what yoga teachers do is they walk in and they say all that you need is yoga, and they invalidate a person's need for another professional. And this could be a doctor, or it could be a psychiatrist, or it could be a counselor. It could really be anybody that helps them to get healthy. And it's so, I want to say silly, because when somebody comes to you and they've broken their arm, you don't say, oh, well, just do yoga and it's going to be okay. You send them to the doctor and you tell them, get well, And even when somebody comes to you and they've got autism, or they had cancer, or they have a hip replacement, we understand that the practice that they need is different from what other people have. But when it comes to mental issues like PTSD and anxiety and CPTSD and depression, we somehow think that this is something that you can just shift your attitude. And one of the things that I think yoga teachers, when they come into the space, they need to understand is that every single person that's going to come to you is going to ask something different from you. The steps need to be small, because these people that have these disorders, they literally need to rewire and reprogram their nervous system and their brains. Their brains and their nervous systems don't function like other people's. They don't notice, absorb, or process things like other people. And they have a lot of walls and coping mechanisms, and these will come up even in a yoga class. So the best way to address these things or to practice with these people would be one-on-one. It can't always be one-on-one, and in the cases that it can't, there needs to be an open channel for teachers to talk to the students. If you are doing group classes, don't do generic or general group classes. Don't put your average stressed BP heart issue student with your PTSD student, because they are going to ask for different things. You have groups that are just for anxiety, just for depression, or whatever the case might be, because they require certain things from you, certain very specific things from you. And those are the roles that we get to play. We need to adapt the practice to suit the students specifically, and then work with and have this open channel with whatever other support system the student is using. So if they are using counselors or psychiatrists, ideally they would use these people that are open to yoga, and you would have discussions with these people so that you can understand what you need to look out for, and they can understand what role you are playing and how you are helping. So you would guide each other.
Yeah, and you know, you as you rightly said, one of the things that we frequently tell to people, because sometimes even when we are treating people for various lifestyle issues, sometimes people come to us where the situation is so advanced that they need medical intervention, right? They need a doctor, otherwise situation will not get under control. And what people need to realize is that yoga is a way of keeping yourself healthy and balanced. And you know, you can bring your body into balance, but sometimes there are more immediate things that need to be kept together. And you know, I think there has to be a sort of correlation, as you rightly said, with modern science and with the ancient sciences of yoga to coexist. And people really need to see, you know, for example, there are a couple of people that who come to us for diabetes, for example. They come and tell us that, shall I stop my medicine from tomorrow, since I'm starting your yoga, you know, the entire program today, shall I stop my medicine from tomorrow? And we tell them, no, keep the medicine and keep your doctor's counsel intact. We'll start the program, and gradually just ask them to have an open mind, because your doctor shouldn't come and tell you that don't do yoga. They should have an open mind, and then, you know, you sort of go together, and then you slowly bring the medicines down, and then after say 2 or 3 months, then you start to see the change, wherein I've seen people go off medicines. But had I put them off medicines on the first day, you know, that would have been detrimental.
It would have been very detrimental. And so one of the biggest things I think that happen is the stigma that is attached to getting help. And I mean, before I even started my yoga classes, I did meditation courses. So my meditation practice was fairly set. And I remember having these problems that I was dealing with, and whenever I discussed it with a yoga teacher, they would always just tell me, you know what, it will pass, or it will get better, or just think happy thoughts, or whatever the case might be. And it made, and for a person with PTSD or depression or anxiety, you're just causing an extra affliction, because it made me feel like such a failure, because what was I doing that I wasn't getting these things resolved? And about 2-3 years ago, I realized that my meditation practice was doing a fantastic job of keeping me sane for an average day, or helping me cope in an average day. But any time the wheels fell off the bus, like there was a big crisis, it wasn't enough. And I went to go and see a psychologist to help me resolve the deeper subconscious things that my mind was protecting. It was just a survival technique that my brain was doing. It was building such a hard casing over my subconscious mind and the experiences that I've had, and the grooves or the patterns that my childhood had created in order for me to, well, in its own way, to survive. and according to itself, I wasn't surviving. So it needed to do these things in order to help me survive. But those things were so ingrained and hardened, I couldn't get to them with just a normal meditation practice. And chances are that maybe 10, 20 years down the line, meditation would have helped me resolve those things. But I have a life to live, and I have children that I'm trying to raise in a way that doesn't continue the cycle that I grew up in. So I needed that immediate resolve. So I went to go see a psychologist. She helped me through it. It worked along with meditation and yoga and everything else to release those patterns on a physical level as well. And we have to start understanding the relationships between all of these things.
Yes. So I just to summarize it, if the water pipeline in your home has pores, you don't change the water pipeline today, because that would have like 2 days without water. You fix it there and then gradually change it, and not do the everything on day one. So beautifully put, Nadya. I think everything has to go together. Yoga will help you. Yoga and meditation will help you keep these things at bay and help you manage yourself. But what you need today, if you need medical intervention, you need it today. But it doesn't mean that it has to go without yoga. So both of these practices have to continue. And by the time you get familiar with the body so much that you're able to continue just with yoga. So thanks a lot for sharing that. And we'll just take one question more. What, as you I think you've already covered, when people specifically are dealing with trauma, people with trauma, do you think people should take any special, what kind of cares can people take? Because if there's a yoga teacher who's listening to this and they see, maybe shall I create different groups? Should I do a counseling first? What do I tell people who have trauma? Or if I discover that there are people in my class who have trauma, and a regular class is something, it's just like a special kid. If a regular class is not fitting them well, what should I do to identify these kids or these people?
Well, my suggestion to all yoga teachers, especially the 200 hours, is to understand that you won't always know enough to deal with these things yet. And even if you have personally experienced it, your personal journey is different from other people's. You can't read about anatomy and call yourself a brain surgeon. So when a student comes to you and you need to have enough space and enough non-judgment and not create a toxic positivity kind of space, or allow for spiritual bypassing. So you really need to acknowledge and accept that what this person is telling you is true. Yeah. And from that point, you listen, you break down their practice into the smallest steps that they can accomplish. I've heard some strange things, like students will come to teachers and say, I don't feel okay closing my eyes. A person who does this is probably telling you, I have PTSD, I have anxiety disorder. And the teachers say, oh, just keep on practicing, it will come with time. You have to really listen to what your students are telling you. And then you have to break it down for them. You have to create a safe space. You have to say, okay, don't close your eyes. If that doesn't work for you, it's perfectly fine. You have to say things like, you know what? Why don't you sit in the back of the class where there's nobody behind you and you can see everybody in front of you, because that will allow for you to feel safer in this space. You really have to create a space where people aren't pushed, yes, which often happens in the Western world, where people aren't pushed, but they are accepted, validated, and they know from what you are doing that you are listening. So it's not always available to create different groups for every single person in your class. Sometimes you can integrate these people. but you have to really listen. Spend time with them. Talk to them beforehand in order to know what their mental space is before they start a class. Talk to them afterwards and adjust your practice. Understand that you don't know. Ask questions and just break it down as much as you can.
And I just remembered there's a book called Yoga Makarand, which is the nectar of yoga, which is in English. It is written by Thirumalai Krishnamacharya. So Thirumalai Krishnamacharya is like the founder of modern yoga as we know it. So he has this very famous quote on teachers. He says, "Teach what is within you, not as it applies to you, but as it applies to the one in front of you." So I think essentially what you're saying is this only, that you've got to adapt your knowledge as the student who's in front of you. Yes. Before I just remembered, I think we talked about so much about trauma and how yoga applies to the society, and people doing great jobs. I'll just do a shout out to two people, Alex and Adrian. These guys are doing beautiful work. Alex does a lot of charity work for rural kids in Peru. He spends a lot of time from Canada, just months there teaching really rural kids, does a fundraise for them and then teaches them yoga. So shout out to you, Alex. And Adrian works a lot on rehabilitating kids in juvenile centers. So Nadya, thanks a lot. For those of you who want to follow Nadya, we'll be putting her social media and YouTube and all of those links there, so you can directly reach out to Nadya if you have something similar, or if you want to share your experiences of if you know somebody who's suffering from trauma, or if you are somebody who's teaching people with trauma and you want to get in touch with Nadya. We'll have our social media icons here, and you can directly reach out and get in touch with her. So Nadya, thanks a lot for joining us today. It has been a real pleasure talking to you and knowing you. So thanks a lot.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Nadya.